On.
Some numbers.
Right, thank you members for taking your seats. All right, we're on page 41 of your agenda, item number 10. Moving to regional public transport operations and performance monitoring. Thank you, Trudy and Catherine. That's right. Item 10. Thank you, Trudy.
Right. Thank you, Chair Strange. Look, I just want you to take the report as read, and I'm here to field any questions if there are some for today.
Thank you. Thank you, Trudy. Members, I might add just a touch on top of that, which is really some positive news in respect of overall public transport patronage performance in particular, which has seen us for the first quarter of this calendar year back where we were pre-COVID. The pattern of that demand has changed a little. It's very, very peaky, which means that our rush hour times in the morning and afternoon is where the majority of that is, school travel, work travel. But it does mark a significant milestone in respect of the return of public transport, and probably starts to give us a bit of a view now on what some of the measures that the committee and the government have taken start to give us a view of the effectiveness of some of those when they were introduced, such as half-priced fares. It was really in a time of so much flux in the system, it was very difficult to tell the actual impact that those investments had. Now, there was a bit of work done that suggested that they were having some impact, but I think we're really starting to see both. I think we're really starting to see the results of some of those efforts now. Also really interesting to note that it's not only some of our frequent and regional connector services that have stood up really well. There's a couple of our regional services that also have stood up particularly well post-COVID, in particular those locations that have really been designed closely with those communities. So just wanted to point those few things out.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I just wanted to say well done to the team on all your hard work. Yeah, it's fantastic. We were down in Tikawiti the other day, launching the Tikawiti connector. Lots of interest from the community down there, and that startup service has been very well patronised so far. And the bus on the outside just looks amazing, as do all the regional blue buses as well. Just very localised to their communities, and yeah, stunning to look at as they drive past. Trudy, I was just wondering, could you just talk us through the corporate concessions? Because I note, yeah, we're building steam in that area, and it's pleasing to see that we're working with corporates to enable their decarbonisation of staff travel. So I was just wondering if you could let us know anything else that might be in the pipeline, and whether we should talk to Te Pūkenga.
Thank you, Chair Strange. Yes, look, the latest initiative in terms of corporate concessions is onboarding Genesis. This has been quite a long-standing conversation, but finally we did convert this back in May. And what we're finding on the ground is that there's definitely an appetite from those larger organisations to start looking at sustainable measures for their staff. And one of those is the public transport offering. So now with a complement of a full team on board, we are looking at, excuse me, we are looking at engaging with other organisations as well as some collaboration work with Hamilton City Council. So we're in discussions as we speak with ACC. We're looking at some of the other bigger players within the CBD, as well as the base, that core hub out there as well. So yeah, definitely an opportunity, and I guess complemented with the most recent budget and government initiative in terms of the age concession, all of these things make public transport even more sort of appealing, and hopefully, promote that mode share that we're all aiming to achieve.
Well, thank you. And just on Wintec and Te Pukenga, you just enlighten us as to what's happening there, please.
So with Wintec and the sort of change of structure, etc., they had originally put the concession on hold from May this year, however, have reconsidered that approach and will look to extend that through to the end of December this year. At the moment, with the government initiative and the half price fare piece that will apply to 25-year and under, there could be an opportunity to engage a subsequent conversation as the financial burden associated with this concessionary contribution would be significantly less, potentially going forward. So I will see how those conversations go and we'll report back.
Thank you. And just one more, Te Whatu Ora and DHB.
With the DHB, we had looked at a slightly different product with them, and that was around ring fencing the sort of bus stops that service the hospital, and whether a sort of concessionary product for anyone that gets on or off at those bus stops could be put in place. Look, the development is all being done from a systematic point of view to make that possible, but with the changes that have come about with the DHB to the new way of working from the 1st of July, the funding is uncertain. So I will be engaging once I understand who the relevant representative is within the group to restart those conversations.
Thank you, Trudy. I'll go to Oliver next.
Hi, so I just had one question. I'm just wondering, is it possible to get data on the number of disabled people that are using public transport in the region and how we might go about doing that?
Thanks for that query, Oliver. Look, we do have the means in part in terms of that data request with our existing accessibility concession product. Look, that's a wide sweeping generalisation. There's that's capturing all of the disabled communities, but what it does do is there is an eligibility criteria that anchors to that. So we do have visibility of those that have onboarded with that AC concession, and obviously are having the benefit of using the public transport services for free or no charge. So we could sort of, off the top of my head, I believe there's about 3,500 to 4,000 accessibility concession users at the moment. So we could provide some data around sort of the profile, but obviously need to be careful around the Privacy Act and that type of thing. But yeah, we can take that as an action.
Okay, thank you. Sort of clear.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on just a few things. Firstly, with the accessibility, I suppose I'd call it a KPI. I'd be really interested in the number of users compared to the total number of possible users, and have that reported on a regular basis so we can identify any trends, because I think it's really important for us to be understanding whether or not it's a service that can meet the needs of that sector of our community, and sort of have confidence that the services that we're providing make sense to them, and also they can actually onboard and stuff like that. And I was also very interested in the corporate concessions as well, and whether or not you've developed any targets. So for instance, you could say that trying to get corporate concessions to drive mode shift is a really strong lever, to reduce carbon emissions. And so you could say, well, we know that for corporates with, I suppose, staff numbering, say, over 50, it makes sense for them to do it because it's going to reduce their overheads and perhaps make travel cheaper for their cheaper and safer, for their employees. And so we say, like, if we could get even 30% of Hamilton corporates to be doing this, we feel that we could reduce carbon emissions, by those participants, by at least 50%, if not more, stuff like that. So it'd be really good for us to work up some targets so that we could see, is it worth investing more staff time and effort in this, and getting a stronger message out there. And even, I notice also about communications, these are fantastic stories to be telling, and I really hope that the strategy that you have for communications in this space is going to emphasise the really good news stories that, working together, with our community and business stakeholders, we can really drive really meaningful and I suppose beneficial mode shift change. And the last question I had was around, there was a mention of driver availability and the likelihood that we can increase service frequency in those areas that had service reductions. So I'd be really keen to understand when those services are going to be reinstated, or the likely time frame for that. Because I'm new to the committee, I don't know how much the services were reduced in the past. And again, it'd be really good to have some kind of performance measure that if there are areas of the city that have had reduced frequency, what was the percentage of that reduction, and when are we likely to see that frequency being reinstated or even increased to, for instance, a benchmark for the central city or something, that kind of thing. So in that way, the committee can have a meaningful input into, the amazing work that you guys are achieving, I guess. Sorry, it's such a long question.
Thank you, Claire. Director Mark, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we are achieving with our operator a significant increase in the number of drivers that we have available, which is great. One of the challenges that comes with is that in order to increase a service level, you kind of you move in steps. If you have one extra driver, that's kind of great, but you can't run an additional service with one driver. So we're working really closely with our operator to make sure that the services that our planning work is in line with their recruitment effort and retention of drivers, so that we're trying to keep that as matched as closely as we can. I think your point is very well made in respect of some visibility for the committee over that, because one thing that I think we are unlikely to be doing is building back exactly the same service in the same way as we had prior. In fact, what we're trying to do is take the opportunity to learn from what we've seen in respect of those services, the patronage of the reduced timetable, so that we can put that effort back in the places where the regional public transport plan tells us we should be building our services. So in respect of the urban area in particular, that's really the only area. Our units 1 and 2 is where we've had the reduced timetable. And all our other services, we haven't had the same pressure in relation to drivers, and those services have been able to be maintained. But within that urban area, the intention, as is set out in the regional public transport plan, is to move towards higher frequency core routes. And so it's with the increasing driver availability that we're able to look to timetable things like the introduction of the Meteor service and the increased frequencies on the Comet. There was in October 2022 a small uplift in some of those coverage services as driver availability started to slowly come back online. But the next big uplift is going to really be around the Meteor and Comet services. So, but I think perhaps a little bit of a before and after, and next steps might be a useful thing for us to provide you with some visibility of.
Thank you, Mark. Mayor Lynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just some questions for clarification, if I may. And so I'm referring to agenda page 45. And because I'm a little bit at arm's length in this process, you'll forgive me if they sound like stupid questions. So I'll just run the questions by you, and then maybe we can.
Sorry, Mayor Lynn. I believe that's the next item.
So we're on the.
Do you want to hold your questions?
I'll hold
that one.
Thank
you. Mayor Adrian.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I guess that following on from Claire's question, and I think Mark's probably summed it up for me, I'm really conscious of the challenge here of going out and over-promising and under-delivering. You know, like it's sort of like growing pains. You know, you can go out, you have to, and I get it, that's that stepped approach, so I really do reinforce that, because, yeah, there's a risk here of going out and offering public transport and not actually having the capacity to achieve it. So, yeah, just happy to hear Mark's answer just before actually and clarified, so that's great. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Councillor Phillip.
Thank you, through the chair. Just a question on the corporate concessions. Just around clarifying, has WIC sort of just targeted some of the corporates, or have they taken a broad brushstroke over the whole sector and gone out to all the major corporations to see what the appetite is? Like Fonterra and further outlying industries.
Look, in response to your question there, look, we have targeted our approach up until today, but we are looking at having a more structured sort of outreach program, and that as part of that program, we'll also look at who we should be sort of reaching out to in terms of this corporate concession. We've had a little bit of a hiatus in terms of, the last couple of years, and, the appetite just simply not there for shared travel. However, very, very acutely aware that the opportunity is now, and, looking to formulate what that approach needs to be. And, you mentioned Fonterra there. That's someone we had engaged with a couple of years ago, but they sort of whittled away because of what's happened in the last 2 years. But absolutely now is the time to pick those sorts of conversations up, as well as I mentioned before, we're doing quite a bit of collaboration work in terms of HCC and where they're sort of targeting different organisations as well. So together, You know, we're offering a myriad of opportunities as such collectively, if that makes sense.
Does, and I asked the question because cost of living crisis is going to change people's perspective on driving their own vehicles, transport, and I do understand that you've got to marry it in with the number of drivers and services you can run. It'd be good to get an idea of the appetite. I think it will have changed significantly.
Yeah, thank you for that. It has been interesting to note that our wider regional services didn't dip much. They were the really strong performers during rising petrol prices, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see that continue. Councillor Kevin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question from Taupo staff. Looking for some feedback on patronage and the numbers. If I could get you to connect Claire from our transport team. I'm just looking for how well the new services is working as well. All accounts is good, but I'm interested in some data. Thanks.
Thank you. We take that. Recommendation and will ensure that we are specific around the Taupo and Tokoroa services. Yeah, but look, on balance, you know, the new services have been in situ since October. There is some exciting initiatives to support those services in terms of and the appearance of an EV vehicle, which you know, not finally, that's the wrong word. The vehicle is built and it's heading over to New Zealand as we speak. So, you know, we will look to support and promote the introduction of that vehicle when it happens, as well as what comes with that is, you know, promoting the existing services and what they have to offer. I think we have seen, you know, some uptake in the Connect to Taupo services. They were a new offering, and that has been, you know, some good news there. But obviously, there's still work to be done.
Thank you for that. It was just that the team were looking for a bit of feedback. We still get a bit of noise around the Turangi Taupo Connect service, and it's around timing, and it's around length of stay. So there's just a few teething issues there to work out. But thank you.
All right, thank you. If there's nothing further, we'll look to move that item. Thank you, Mayor Adrian. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Phillip. All those in favour? Against? Carried. All right, on to item 11, page 44. Thank you, Catherine, and welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, committee. So I'll take the Regional Public Transport Planning Report as read. However, I do just want to point out two key things which may be of significance or importance. The first is that the implementation of a regional approach to total mobility services is underway, which will relieve the territorial authorities of their funding requirements for this as it shifts over to regional council. The second of which is that the new service concepts for the Eastern Districts have been developed. These are new public transport routes to connect some of the communities in the Eastern Districts there. These concepts have cover a variety of options at this point. Coromandel services, Waihi services, and Eastern Coastline services, all of which the various concepts are either standalone services or interlined with the existing Thames Connector service or the Eastern Connector. Eastern District service that runs from Hamilton. We are also considering a concept of a hybrid approach, which links the various options to create a hybrid sort of initiative. So the next step for this project is to refine these options to develop a recommended network and a staged implementation plan for this going forward. And just to note that the funding for this is the recommended package would come from the Waikato Regional Long-Term Plan and the Regional Land Transport Plan. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Mia Lynn.
Thank you. I think some of my questions have just been answered, so thank you so much. And so the questions that I had were around the hybrid services, the funding, and I think you've explained that that's transitional at the moment, that's going through. I guess the other question is around the potential for hybrid integration, and we've had some local transport service providers asking us whether there is the possibility or potential for integration with total mobility. In Whitianga, for example, when we've got a ferry service which brings people over, once they get off the ferry, they can't get to any other parts of the town, and the town's growing, so you've got supermarkets and doctors and pharmacies and churches that people can't get to. So is there a potential for integration with a private taxi service and total mobility, or some kind of hybrid model there? Is that what you mean by hybrid, or have I got that my head off in the wrong direction there?
If I may, through the chair, the initial hybrid approach was using a combination of both a standalone service and the interlining with the existing services. So rather than doing one or the other, it's a combination of both. The next steps in terms of developing, our preferred options, I guess, or recommendation going forward, each concept will go through a multi-criteria framework assessment. Part of the objectives of those assessments would be integration and considering aspects like that, whether it would align directly with existing transport, like taxi services, possibly not, but I might ask Mark if he's got anything further to add on that.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. The only thing I'd have to add is there's probably two opportunities for integration there, and they relate to our community transport providers and total mobility services. So total mobility services through the regionalisation of that program, subject to the availability of providers or operators, taxi companies who are appropriately accredited under that scheme. There will be those will start to become accessible wherever providers are, and that may well include the likes of Whitianga. The other thing is community transport providers. So on your next committee agenda, there will be a report providing you an update on the allocation of the Community Transport Fund. At the moment, the community transport providers, several in the Coromandel, may well be quite significant beneficiaries of that fund because of some of the impacts that they've had. To date, those transport providers have been really focused on meeting health needs of people rather than providing other local transport needs. But one of the things that we're looking for through that fund is to try and provide a bit more bandwidth for those groups so that they can start to provide not only health transport needs, but to other local transport needs. So they may well be, particularly where that transport might not be as time critical, they might be very, very useful providers in terms of some of those local transport needs. It's one of the edges of this work that Catherine has been leading in terms of the formalised network, the spine of a network, and where does that interlace with the more localised services that are really bespoke to the needs of those individual communities. So perhaps not a direct answer, but we're very attuned to that issue, including the interaction with private services such as the Whitianga Ferry, and indeed such as our intercity services as well. that are operated by commercial providers, making sure that to the extent we're able, we've got that integration between those modes.
Through the chair. Thanks, Mark. And that's a big help. So there's a report coming to the next meeting. I have one more comment, if I may, and if there was ever an opportunity for to make a significant difference, it would be an electric ferry in Whitianga. It's a private ferry operator at the moment, and I don't want to step on their toes in any way, shape, or form, but it's a 2-minute trip. Opportunity for an electric ferry. David, can you sort that out, please?
Thank you, Mayor Len. Councillor Kevin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to check my hearing. The funding for total mobility, the intent is for that to roll over into the long-term plan going forward for the regional council?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all.
All right. Councillor Phillip.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Catherine, just I note in the report that there was a meeting between TCDC and yourselves regarding the Eastern District Services. We at Karakia weren't aware of that and would like to be part of that discussion. I think we do sit in that Eastern sector. Because the community transport providers probably suits us better, fits better with what we've got, but we still want to be part of that overarching discussion because most of our area, I guess, would be looking to transport within our area rather than to Hamilton. So the smaller units would work better. And we're looking at huge growth in regard to time and aspect of our town and Pyro in particular. There's that Longridge estate that's absolutely huge, and we've also got the racecourse, the ability to put in 450 houses, and that's just starting to go ahead now. So a private plan change, and that's underway. So yeah, there's some huge growth going to happen in our area, and we need to sort out in this regard. So if we could be part of that future discussion, that'd be
Happy to do that.
Thank you, everyone. If there's nothing further, we'll look for a mover. Thank you, Councillor Kevin. Who was that? Philip. Thank you, Philip. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Right. Waka Kotahi. We have got David and Fabian. Welcome.
Right, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just start out quickly by introducing my colleague Fabian Marsh. Fabian's the Senior Manager Road Safety System Design, so he's going to talk to us today about Road to Zero. Fabian did this presentation to the Bay of Plenty Transport Committee in the last round, and it was quite well received, and it answered quite a few questions, quite a few of the repeat questions that I get at most meetings. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to get Fabian to come and do it and do it once. But what I'll do is I'll quickly I've got a wee presentation here around the report. So I'll take the report as read if that's all right with you.
Yes.
And I'll try and kick through the presentation that I've got in about 20 minutes. And then we'll go from there. So just say next slide. So these are really just the highlights for you. So as you'll be aware, hopefully, in Budget 23, there was some additional funding, $1.3 billion for Waka Kotahi. The report breaks that down in some detail for you in terms of where that funding has been allocated. But suffice to say, it's quite welcome. Most of it is targeted at shortfalls around public transport services, emergency works and resilience. Gives us a little bit of headroom around the emergency works that are going on at the moment, and also a little bit of a start on resilience work, which will be welcome in some parts of the region. and it is that $1.3 billion is spread right out to 29-30, depending on what it has been allocated to. But as I say, the detail is in the report if you want the detail. Next slide. Just a quick update in terms of speed management planning. Yep, sweet. So really this is just to let you know the deadlines around, and we've had some of this discussion already today, but for full speed management plans, now the 5th of October 2023, for the publication of a consultation draft, and final date for submission in March 2024. The deadlines are tight-ish, but what we're trying to do is make sure that it aligns as best we can with the regional land transport plans, so that we don't end up in a situation where we're consulting on one and not the other. So really it is tight, but it is necessary in terms of timing. Again, quite a bit of detail in the report if you need it. Also, on our speed management planning, literally one word at NZTA, on the website, there's heaps of detail there if anybody needs it. Your teams that are involved in this are working with, I checked, they are working with our teams, so your staff will know what's going on. If they don't, let me know, but they should do. In terms of state highway speed management plans, we're continuing to work through, and we've talked about this already this morning, the announcement around speed management at schools, at Kura, etc., and an implementation plan for that. And of course, working through what the implications of the reprioritisation are to focus on those 1%. It does mean that there's very few places in our region, well, actually there are a few places, but relatively few places in our region that are going to be in that first tranche of speed management work. But as I said earlier today, we're bringing all of the rest into the full speed management plan that will simply continue to work through for 24-27. Mike, just plough through, and if there are questions, we'll just grab them at the end. Next slide. So this is just a heads up, because I've got a few questions actually from some of your teams over the last couple of weeks around bitumen supply. So you'll be aware that with Marsden Point closing, we're essentially importing all of our bitumen. And Z Energy was the major player in terms of bitumen importation. They are pulling out of the market. So we asked for a supply chain survey, if you like, just to say, well, is that a good thing, or is that something we should be really, really concerned about? And we've had reassurance that as Z Energy exits the market, there are enough other providers in the market that we should have bitumen supply certainty. There's some regional variations around this, and so there will be some sort of lumpy bits that we will have to work through, but at a national level, we're pretty confident that we should be all right in terms of bitumen supply going forward. And that is not just for us, that's also, for your supply requirements as well. It might take a little while to settle, but we've got a good lead in with Z Energy exiting the market anyway. Next slide. Sorry, I'm trying to follow this on the screen because I've got notes as well. Oh, VKT. So VKT, obviously we've been talking about this for quite a while. The government have now announced that we're going to initially focus on the Tier 1 urban areas. So for us in this region, that means Hamilton, Waikato and Waipa districts as a collective Tier 1, and focus on light vehicle. So initiatives to reduce light vehicle use. And you may recall from previous Transport Committee meetings, I've harped on a bit about the fact that in the Waikato, we have the highest use by miles of individual private vehicles for short trips. So there's a really big gains to be made there. We also have very high commuter use from the likes of Cambridge into Hamilton, Te Awamutu into Cambridge. So having Waipa and Matamata actually into Hamilton. So having that slightly wider Tier 1 focus is quite important for us. And as you know, we've talked about this already, there's some opportunities, quite a few opportunities there for us to make some big gains, focusing on that private use and public transport. Next slide. So just key milestones in that program. So as you know, there's funding in the Climate Emissions Reduction Fund for this kind of work. Expressions of interest for that for funding closed. No, haven't quite closed, but they closed this month. And so we're really engaged with those key parties about what we're going to be, what is going to be put forward for funding. And I think, as I say, I think there's some good opportunities for us. We've got some really good programs, and we're blessed with, I think, both a regional council and a city council that are really, really well aligned in terms of what that should look like. So, you know, I'm pretty confident that we've got a good case to lead there. Ministry of Transport are leading council engagement on the draft GPS. Enough said. I can't give you any confidence about timing or process for that at the moment. But what we do know is that post-election there'll be a review of the GPS anyway. So, you know, one way or another, we're going to be having to live with some uncertainty around the GPS for a little while. The rest of those dates are self-explanatory, I think, and are in the report. So happy to pick up if there are any questions. And the last slide on the national sort of things is our bilingual traffic signage. So you'll be well aware, I'm sure, that we have open consultation on 94 bilingual traffic signs, and they are principally around destination signs, public and active transport, walking and cycling, wayfinding, general advisory, motorway and expressway, so the big green signs, and our temporary signs, so stop, go, etc. You've all heard me talk about this before. I think the key thing is that the implementation process for this is we're keeping the costs as low as possible by using the opportunities that come up for new signs or replacements, not replacing a perfectly good sign that's been there for a year. That said, there are some quick fixes, for example, on the expressway where we have stickers that we can just put a sticker onto the sign and make those changes on some of the bigger signs. So you will see some of that roll out relatively quickly once the consultation process is done. I'm not going to say any more about that. It's become quite an interesting political conversation, but suffice to say that thus far they've been mostly pretty well received. And they're not that hard to understand. Just quickly, by way of some Waikato updates, because you know these are very, very relevant to yourselves. Maintenance and operations, in spite of the disastrous season that we have had, across the region, we've managed to do 75% of the forecasted delivery for road resurfacing, which is a miracle under the circumstances. The Central Waikato program particularly has just been hammered by the weather, and so we are a long way behind the 8 ball in that respect, unfortunately, and we will do our best to catch up once the summer season kicks off. Pray for a really good early season is all I can say. We will still have capacity constraints. Obviously, you know, we can have best intentions to deliver 110% of a program, but in reality, we don't have 110% of a team. So we will still be in catch up for a wee while. East Waikato, however, managed to deliver 93% of their maintenance programs, which is again just amazing, especially given the results on the issues facing Coromandel. One of the things we're doing on Coromandel at the moment is while 25 is closed, is we are working at the moment to bring some budget forward so that we can 25A, sorry, so that we can jump ahead of the program on 25A. Obvious opportunity there because your traffic management is very minimal, your disturbance, you can work as long as you like, you can spread your machinery all across the road and not have to worry about only the locals, and we can work, you know, there are actually relatively few locals on that road. And if we can bring that forward, what it means is we can then play catch up with those other areas, particularly in the other areas that we haven't, Central Waikato, where we haven't been able to catch up. So yeah, good news on the whole, given the summer we had. extraordinary effort by the teams. Next slide. So just a heads up, having said that, we are expecting, yeah, there we go. We're expecting quite a tough winter in terms of the impacts of those areas where we haven't delivered the whole program. We have got incredibly saturated catchments everywhere you look. As you know, we've talked about this a lot. Weather saturation means that when you're driving over those reed surfaces, it's basically a hydraulic pump, and if it finds a crack, it's going to open up. It's going to become a pothole in the space of an hour or two. So we are being very, very clear publicly about the fact that you can expect that the network will not be pretty over winter, and there is literally nothing we can do about that. Simply put, particularly in the central part of the region. That's regrettable, but it's just it's an unavoidable fact for us. The other issue, of course, is, and the reason we put the tapu slip up there is just the ongoing risk of slips is significant because those catchments are wet. And where we're talking about there is probably the sort of west coast, unfortunately, and Coromandel. Other areas not so much, but certainly west coast and Coromandel. We expect to see more slips, and we have deployed the crews, the NOC crews, to be as quickly able to respond as possible, but we're going to get disruptions. And we've been, pretty open about that. Next slide. Which one's up there? Yeah, so we'll, as I say, we'll keep sharing those key messages. We'll make sure that you've got those messages. Your teams are going to be having the same issues as ours. And hopefully we don't see too many more of those. That's the State Highway 23 slip, not long after it had gone. So fingers crossed. We are, when I say fingers crossed, the teams are out looking at maximum effort on drainage, on any areas where there are known cracks or slip areas. They are putting, you'll drive, when you're driving around the network, you'll see the little raised bitumen bunds along some of the sides, and that's really to direct water off the road away from those areas that are sensitive. So they've put a huge effort into that at the moment, and that's more about prevention than remedy. But if we get through the winter, then we can come back and do those remedies. Next slide, quick update on Coromandel. So the State Highway 25A Taparahi slip site, hopefully you're all aware that we have a preferred tenderer. We have a design for a bridge to cross that slip. Gosh, that photo's very early. That's it looks a lot more dramatic than that now. It's a joint venture between McConnell Dowell, who are bridge specialists, and Fulton Hogan, who will do the physical works, supported by Becker and Tonkin and Taylor doing the design work and the consenting and all those kind of things that are required. We're currently still in negotiations with, this is the symptom of trying to do this very, very quickly means that we are running a lot of process in parallel. And so we're still finalising contract negotiations, even as we are in the process of ordering materials and things. The great story about this design is it's very, very simple. Much of it can be prefabricated off-site. It's a steel superstructure with concrete bridge spans, 3-span bridge. And so because much of it can be constructed off-site, the risk of weather disruptions is reduced significantly. It's also predicated on using pretty much mostly local and or existing materials in New Zealand. So we're not going to be relying on importing something from overseas and having shipping issues, etc., which is the beauty of this design. It means it can be delivered very quickly. When I say very quickly, it's still 12 months, but relatively quickly. They are proposing a rolling site occupancy that will see them working pretty much 20 hours a day. And there's some give and take in that, for obvious reasons around safety management, etc. We will be installing a camera on the site. and that camera it'll be by necessity, it'll be a big fisheye that just has an oversight of the site, but it will mean that public can log in and see what's going on the site, and see progress. And the reason we're doing that is we want to minimize the risk of people rubbernecking, and we have had already people wandering up to the site, believe it or not, onto the site, taking things from the site, literally going down into the slip, and which is, it's pretty. I've been down there, and it's not a very safe place to be. But anyway, so part of the rationale there is people will be able to see. One of the other things we're going to do, and Len will be pleased about this, is we're really aware that we have this small recovery group, advisory group that the minister's been working with, and many of the members on that advisory group are representing parts of the community that are impacted by the closure, significantly impacted by the closure, and they haven't seen it. They haven't been up there, so we are going to organise a trip with some buses to take people up to have a look once the site has been set up and before they really get into the heavy works. That's probably enough about Coromandel. Next, and so just for context, this is the cumulative daily rainfall, and this is reflected across the whole region, but this Coromandel is the worst by quite a long way, but a similar issue. And that top blue line with the shading underneath it is the current rainfall. It's actually not current rainfall, that was in May, and we're now into June, but that blue line was the current rainfall. The green line is what we would have expected in a normal average year. So in a normal average year by then, we would have had about a metre of rain, and we'd had 3.2 on the Coromandel. So even if, and you can see how that graph plays, even if it stops raining tomorrow, we will still have more rain this year than in a normal year, even if it doesn't rain again until January, which clearly would not be good for a whole bunch of reasons. But that just gives you a sense of how saturated everything is up there, and why we're so nervous about slips, and why we're so nervous about every time it rains. Now that plays out when you do the graph for Waitomo, it plays out for when you do the graph for the King Country, it plays out pretty much across the whole region. We don't have a dry area in this region at the moment. Even Taupo, it plays out. The great thing about Taupo is it drains reasonably well, but even there, you still get you still get your fair share. Okay, next slide. So some good news stories. So Stataui to 23 to Raglan, that underslip repair is complete. What we'll see over the next little while is shifting back onto the original road alignment. And that is because the bypass we built is on private land. We didn't purchase it. We were essentially given the use of it by the landowner, and we have an agreement with them around remediation. So we are to the extent that they wish us to, putting it back. But that site has been engineered incredibly well. It's very, very stable, and there's no risks, no ongoing risks there for slips, at least not at that site. Next slide, State Highway 30 Kōpaki Bridge. So this has been an ongoing issue for a long, long time. Kōpaki Bridge down by Tikwiti. You can see the old bridge on the left-hand side of that photo. Crosses the railway track, was in very poor condition. We were down to the point of having no heavy vehicles going across it. And you've heard me talk about some of the dramas with that. The new bridge, 2 lanes, super fit for purpose, a spectacular bridge. So we had a opening there in Blessing, 26th of May, I think it was, and huge turnout, over 150 people turned out. Really good day. So yeah, really exciting that that's been finished, and that makes a really big difference for a lot of the heavy vehicles that travel through that area, but also the school bus, for example, which was really struggling to get across the railway track. So yeah, great outcome there. Next slide. State Highway 31 Kawhia, this is the underslip repair. So not unlike the State Highway 23 one, except that we didn't lose a chunk of road, but we very nearly did. Again, that has been repaired. Slightly different repair to the Raglan Road, but Nevertheless, that could have gone very bad. And you can see the scale of the slip there. Again, big piles, lots of retaining walls, and things are stabilised there. One of the things the team did as they were doing that work is actually travel that whole network to look at other potential slip sites. And those of you that do travel that road, probably not many of you, will have noticed that we have put some other drainage in along the road, because there were a few sites that went, yeah, it's probably not an issue at the moment, but let's just be doubly careful. So be really conscious that that is the only sealed way in and out of Kawhia. So yeah, belts and braces on that one. So yeah, again, very challenging piece of work because we didn't have a bypass option. So the team had to close the road for periods of time, as you know, working on weekends, etc. Once you get the drilling rigs and things onto the site, it's not like you can just send them home again at the end of the day because they're miles from anywhere. So the road was compromised for quite a while, and the community were really, really good about it, actually, especially given the size of the detour that was put in place. But yeah, some really big success works. That's the stuff that has taken the capacity away from doing some of the other things that people would love us to have done because they want smooth roads. But actually, that's where that effort's gone. And hats off to the team. Did an amazing job under pressure. I'll stop now for any questions, and then over to Fabi.
Thank you, David. Claire.
Yeah, thanks, David. I had a question about the bitumen supply. Yeah, I'm pretty nervous about it, actually. And you're saying that there might be regions that experience some lumpiness in supply, like that to me might be huge increases and things like that, and delays in getting work done. Like,
Yeah, our biggest concern is actually in the Bay of Plenty,
okay.
and it's not about supply, it's about capacity to process and then give us the product that we use. So the supply chain, probably not too much of an issue. It's more about keeping up with the demand, because the demand is going through the roof. And in terms of processing plants, we've got some processing plant challenges, and that's a national issue, but for us, it's mostly Bay of Plenty. We're not too worried about Waikato.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah. And the scale of works we've got going on here are small. Now that we've done the expressway, and really until we kick off the next really big project, most of what's happening here is relatively small.
And you think that, like, the smaller contractors, the ones that might be used by councils.
Yeah, it should be okay.
They should be okay? Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Phillip.
Thank you, Madam Chair. David, thanks for that report. It was really, really informative. And did have a question here to ask what sort of shifts would be working on that State Highway 25A. So it's really they're going to really dig in.
Well, when we did the tendering, one of the things we said was we are looking for tenders that maximise the opportunity to be on the site working, and we want you to consider how you would achieve 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, knowing that that's totally unrealistic on a site like that. But they've come back with a really good proposal. So,
yeah, the other thing that I was going to ask was, it's interesting that you're going to put a camera up there, because I'm pretty sure Len's aware of it, is that there's a lot of people been going up there and dumping off rubbish. And because I know a few people that ride on their push bikes and they see these cars dumping off mattresses, and really annoying. So if we could use that camera to pin some of them.
So the camera will be focused on the work site, not on the rest.
Yeah,
I think what we'll find is that sort of behaviour will drop off, because there'll be people coming and going from both ends quite constantly through the day, and because you can imagine shifts coming in and out, and the number of workers that are going to be up on that site, they're going to be looking for accommodation, they're going to be going backwards and forwards. There's all the logistics of having a whole huge crew working there all the time will mean there's people coming and going all the time. So I think a lot of that behaviour will drop off.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's always opportunists who do the wrong thing.
The last question I had was around the speed management plans, and we've just gone through that whole process and made decisions on each individual road. But the question I have for you is around decision-making process and how much of that is based on modelling, given that I just have this feeling that some of the decisions that we've made for our local roads are based too much on the modelling and not enough on common sense, whereby the speed limits have gone too low for the use of the road, that although we do want to see a lot more conscious effort of slowing down, we slow it down too much on certain roads, then that's going to create a bigger issue, I feel. So how much of that decision making is based on modelling rather than debate?
I was just going to say, I'm conscious that I've got the real expert sitting right next to me, so I might hand that one to Fabian.
A good question. I will cover it off in more detail during the presentation in terms of basis between how we sort of largely it's based around the survivability. So with research which we'll go into that shows that under certain crash types on certain roads, the most significant risks have been identified, and that so that's probably the quick answer. I think there'll be a lot more information in the presentation, and if there's still questions, we can.
Thank you. Jeanette.
It's counterintuitive. It's red, you're on.
Oh, okay, right. So I'm on. Thank you, David, for your presentation, and thank you also for the traffic safety arrows that we've now had on State Highway 37. And the additional signs that was very gratefully received. State Highway 37 comes into Waitamake's village, and you talked about monitoring and putting extra drainage into Kawhia. Could the same be done, please, for that road coming into Waitamake's, because the slips are still moving, the water's still coming, and there's also a piece there where the road needs to be raised. And you know, Waitama Caves is still surviving, recovering from COVID and everything, and to have that road blocked again would be
Yeah. So
major.
I've actually spoken to Kara about that because you raised it earlier. So they are moving, as I said, a lot of these works. The contractors have been focused on Kawhia Road, for example. So they are over the next couple of months moving south into these other areas to do the same thing, to look at what options. In terms of raising the road, that's a longer term fix that we'll need to look at. But yeah, in terms of that preventative maintenance, they're gradually working their way through over the next little while. Our reality is, if we get another deluge, those roads will flood. There's no currently there's no way of preventing that. But what we can do is make sure that when the floods recede, we've still got a road, and we've still got that's the sort of approach they're taking at the moment, is minimise the damage. Unfortunately, we can't, because the catchments are so saturated. Water's just going to run straight off, and we are going to get flooding.
Thank you.
Mayor Lynn.
Thank you. David, first of all, I just want to do a huge shout out to yourself and your team. I know from the fact that Coromandel's been in the hot seat on some of these projects, I know how much work's gone in behind the scenes, and I just want to put it on the record that David and his team have done an extraordinary job over a very long period of time too. It's been going on for months, since the beginning of January. So well done. And the other thing that I think is really worth pointing out is it's not just 25A. There's the whole State Highway 25 network that Waka Kotahi team are working on simultaneously. So because 25A is down, as you all know, it's put a lot of pressure on the rest of the road network, which is extremely vulnerable. Some of those remediations have already been done. And we're starting to get some good feedback. My question is, I find myself greatly concerned about the level of misinformation that's out there and how that translates at ground level into credible threats to our teams and your teams. We know that on the Tapu Kora Glen Road, a geotech engineer was assaulted not long ago. That barriers have been moved. Waka Kotahi have done a fantastic job at getting information out there, and we've seen it make a difference. It's dampened down some of that heat, some of that rhetoric. Do you have a plan for continuing that information and getting that that level of misinformation dampened down? Will that continue?
Yep. Yeah, so a couple of things there. One, we're seeing the anger and reactionary behaviour across the whole network nationally at the moment. We're seeing it in Ngarawahia, where we've had workers. And the tragedy of this is the people that are actually on the ground are never the decision makers. They never, this is the guy holding the stop go sign, for God's sake. And they've been spat on, they've had things thrown at them, getting verbal abuse. It's extraordinary, actually, the level. And it's an unusual for our crews. I was talking the other day about, I experienced this when I was in dock around the 1080 issues, for example, and it is almost that level of vitriolic anger, which is extraordinary. It's symptomatic of a whole bunch of things, but I think, our priority is to keep our people safe. So yes, Len, the comms will continue. We are, I think we have, Steph, is it weekly, the radio show? So we're on the radio in Coromandel once a week. We're trying really hard. If you've got ideas about things we should talk about, if you're hearing stuff, please let us know, because we're trying really hard to make that really relevant to people. And that's as much as anything just about having a presence in in the airwaves. We're putting out the press releases, working really, really closely with Thames Coromandel. I think sometimes I can't tell the difference between who's is which comms team, because as Len says, it's been months. So we're trying that really hard. One of the other things is we're trying to pivot now a bit more regionally as well, because we're seeing this on State Highway 29, we're seeing it on State Highway 2, we're seeing it on State Highway 1, and we're trying really hard to give people almost overflow information, almost more than they need. I'm afraid that it doesn't stop the angry people. It, unfortunately, it probably moderates the behaviour of 80%, or 90%, but there's still that 10% that are just angry.
It does help.
Unfortunately.
It does help.
Yeah.
And with 99% of the population, the ones that are determined to have a go.
You'll be pleased to know, though, on Tapu Kora Glen, Len, that as of last night, Tapu Kora Glen no longer appears Google Maps as an option.
Hallelujah.
So that took an unbelievable amount of intervention from us to get Google to get that sorted. But you would think with all the technology in the world, we'd be able to do that in 5 minutes. But good God. So it no longer appears on a search, and I confirmed that this morning. So people won't try and take their camper van up there and get angry.
Thank you, Marianne. And yeah, pleasing to hear that we're finally trying to harness that technology and sending people across the correct routes.
Yeah.
If there's nothing further for David, we'll move on to Fabian. I know he's got a presentation. If we could just hold questions to the end and just know that the meeting will finish after that and lunch is waiting, but no pressure. Thank you.
Two ways. There we go. Yep, okay. So good afternoon now. Thank you for inviting me today. My name's Fabian Marsh. I'm the Senior Manager for Road Safety at Waka Kotahi. My team looks after the strategic direction for the various programs that we're tasked under Waka Kotahi to deliver for Road to Zero. Leading up to that, I think some important context is that me and my team did a lot of work around the modelling that sits behind the Road to Zero strategy. It is a government strategy. It's led in terms of its development by the Ministry of Transport. But obviously Waka Kotahi has a significant role in numerous interventions. So that modelling work and the assumptions that underpin the 40% strategy, I'm more than happy to answer a number of questions on that, and hopefully today's presentation will give more of a view of what that looks like. Okay, so what is Road to Zero? Just starting at the very high level, it's based on the premise of Vision Zero. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the moment and what that means. And there's various interpretations of that, what that means. I'd like to try and clarify that, particularly in terms of what we've set ourselves as a target or a goal by 2030. If we're going to achieve a Vision Zero, we need to create a safe system. And the safe system is quite prescriptive around some key principles that we need to take on board to deliver a safe system in terms of what that looks like. Road to Zero is really our what. So Road to Zero sets out our strategic plan, our action plans. It highlights what we need to focus on if we're going to create a safe system and thus achieve a Vision Zero outcome. The Vision Zero is a really highly aspirational goal at some time in the future. In the Road to Zero strategy, it doesn't actually ascribe a date for Vision Zero, albeit numerous jurisdictions around the world are starting to try and achieve Vision Zero or thereabouts by 2050. And we're actually doing some modelling ourselves within Waka Kotahi, along with the Ministry, about what Vision Zero or thereabouts by 2050 would look like in New Zealand. So whilst that's not policy at the moment, that is something that we're looking at in terms of what that could look like. Time frames could shift. But the key thing, I think, is we're not proposing zero by 2030. In fact, the interim goal, which is both ambitious but achievable, is to achieve a 40% reduction in death and serious injury by 2030. And that's based on robust evidence of what works and what doesn't work when it comes to road safety interventions. With that in mind, Road to Zero sets out a range of activities and actions, but there's really 5 key interventions or programs of work that are going to make the largest difference. Particularly in the short term, strengthening our road policing is one of the key things that we could do to create that level of general deterrence so people make safer choices and behave the way we would expect and follow the road rules on the road network. So road policing and enforcement in association with education is very powerful in terms of making people think twice about doing the wrong thing and therefore producing safer behaviours on the network. The next one is speed limits and speed management. You'll see in a moment that road safety fundamentally is about managing speed in one way or another. There's different ways to do it, but fundamentally it's about making sure that we as individuals aren't subject to forces that cause serious harm and injury to us. The speed limits and getting the speed limits safe and appropriate is obviously a key part of that. Investment in infrastructure, as I'll highlight in a moment, there are some infrastructure measures that if we provide the physical separation, we can keep those speed limits high and higher. But without that physical separation, we do need to look at speed management. Safety cameras is another intervention that will obviously fall into the realm of trying to elicit the right types of speed behaviour across the network and therefore making the whole system safer. And safe and clean cars. There is a limit to what vehicles can do in terms of protecting us. And so the evidence I'll take you through today highlights, even in the safest vehicles, what the limitations are and why physical separation through median barriers and speed management through safe and appropriate speed limits is so important, even with those safest vehicles that are available to us. And of course, all of that to work effectively is going to require a strong regulatory framework. And most importantly, it's going to require us to take communities with us. All of those interventions you see there, generally speaking, are the ones that are most effective, but they're also the least popular or the least well received. And so one of the key challenges here is, and a point I want to make is, we are not going to solve this problem by just assuming that we're going to somehow create perfect road users and drivers. That's just not going to happen. The best thing we could do is work as partners to look at how we can create a system that elicits better behaviour and better choices, but also creates a safer environment. In doing that, we're going to have to roll out more of these types of interventions. Being less popular, it's going to be critical that we get the public on board with us so that we can actually implement more of that to then create that system that's going to protect them. Our big challenge at the moment is that we're not going fast enough. So other countries have proven that reductions of death and serious injury of the order of 40 and 50% is actually achievable. You look at Sweden 20 years ago, they had a death toll about the same as ours. And over that 20-year period, they've halved where they are at the moment. And there's various reasons and there's various interventions that they've undertaken, and we've taken those best practices from the likes of Sweden, Netherlands, those sorts of countries that have proven that this is achievable. We also see locally that where we've rolled out some of these interventions, they are effective, they are working. Auckland, with their speed management program, has reduced death and serious injuries where they've treated and lowered speed limits by 30%. I haven't seen the latest evaluation on State Highway 5, but we'll see what that comes up with. But a very similar case in State Highway 6, Blenheim to Nelson. 110 kilometres produced a 80% reduction in death and serious injury. Now that's after 2 years, that's too early to tell. We would actually expect the reduction to be about 30%, so 80% is great at the moment. But obviously that comes with the impact on mobility. And what's important is that over that 110 kilometres, it now takes 4 minutes longer, or 2 seconds per kilometre. So effectively we're trading off 2 seconds per kilometre to save 80% more lives and serious injuries on the network. So very significant. And there are examples of that across the network where we're actually rolling out examples, it is working. The challenge is we need to do more, and how do we do that? So as I mentioned, the SAFE system is really underpinned by these principles. I want to focus primarily on the first two, one around the fact that people do make mistakes, and the other around designing for human vulnerability and what that actually means. What I would highlight with the other two is when it comes to strengthening all parts of the road transport system, there is no silver bullet. We will not find one. We need to look at all those interventions we know work and apply them at pace and scale so that we can make as much of the system as safe as possible, as quick as possible. And the responsibility is shared. So just this morning, writing an article on the fact that a lot of the focus historically has been on road users and trying to get good behaviour, and we need that. That's part of the system. But the SAFE system puts more responsibility on the likes of ourselves, decision makers, people designing the system, people setting speed limits, people implementing road policing, those sorts of things. Because ultimately, by changing the system, again, we create better choices, we create better behaviours, but ultimately we protect people as well. So this is a really good example. You're probably familiar with this campaign, but ultimately this is about a person pulling out of the side road and being struck from the side. The first point I want to make is that around 70% of death and serious, around 70% of serious injury crashes are due to people making mistakes. So when you look at that, 30% is excessive behaviour. So there's no question we need to continue to look at how do we tackle those excessive behaviours. But what it also highlights that if everyone followed the road rules overnight, we'd still have 70% of our serious crashes. So doing that isn't going to be enough. But what that means is we need to look at how we create a safer system. The other point is, in this type of crash, this is a really good example of how those mistakes can happen. If someone pulls out of the side road and is struck from the side, and even if they were at fault or if someone was killed, it would typically be recorded as failed to give way or some form of almost blame on the victim, when in fact it could just be an error of judgment. I've been in a situation like that myself, turning at an intersection at Watchman Road on the way to Napier Airport, and misjudging a truck coming towards me, and very, very near miss, very fortunate. I would consider myself to be a reasonably average driver. I'm certainly aware of the risks that are out on the network, but making an error of judgment like that is something that can happen quite easily. And you look at how many tens of thousands of intersections we have across New Zealand, how many hundreds and thousands of people are turning out of those intersections each and every day. We're relying on every one of those people, on every one of those turning movements, getting it right and making the right decision every time. So it doesn't take away from the fact, as I said, we need to look at excessive behaviour, but we really need to start focusing on what we can do to make the system safer for people that are simply making mistakes. And this is ultimately what the SAFE system boils down to. So those 4 principles are key, but this is ultimately what it's all about. And this comes back to how we establish our speed management framework. And what it says is that if someone is struck as a pedestrian or a cyclist above 30 kilometres an hour, very quickly above 30 kilometres an hour, they're likely to be killed. At 30 kilometres an hour, the likelihood that someone will be killed is about 10%. At 50 kilometres an hour, there'd be more like 80%. It goes up very quickly. It goes up exponentially. Similarly, for side-on impacts at intersections, that threshold that we try to design for is about 50 kilometres an hour. Someone is struck from the side, there isn't much to protect you, and above 50 kilometres an hour, again, the risk of a fatality goes up exponentially. Interestingly, and I think the one that really resonates on rural roads, is that even with the most modern vehicles, head-on crashes above 70 kilometres an hour, again, that's your threshold. At 70 kilometres an hour, two vehicles coming together, both travelling at 70 kilometres an hour, if it was a head-on crash, there's about 10% chance someone will be killed. Our speed limits are 100 kilometres an hour. At those sorts of impact speeds, it's almost certain someone will be killed. When those crashes don't result in someone being killed, it's more by luck than by good science or physics. So this was the video. I just want to try and articulate this more. I think this is the really key point. There are two more crashes. We'll just see if it... Apologies, that is hard to watch, and I should have given a warning for that. But the other point to make with this is how to create a safe system is pretty well known, at least conceptually. So previously, Vision Zero was something that was just purely aspirational. Now, conceptually, at least we know how to create a safe system. We'll get very close to it. The challenge is then to actually achieve that. So I just want to highlight that the 85 to 90% of deaths and serious injuries on network come down to four key crash types. That's head-on crashes, on-off-road crashes, intersection crashes, and crashes involving vulnerable and active users, pedestrians and cyclists. So if we just focused on those four crash types initially, and all of those can be aligned with these types of threshold for speed thresholds, then effectively the challenge is how do you actually design that then? And there's only really, particularly for head-on crashes, there's only really two options at the moment. I mean, vehicle technology will come along over time, but just on vehicle technology, a good point there is it currently takes around 25 years for a vehicle fleet to turn over from when a new technology comes in. So in 2050, if we're trying to achieve close to zero, we're still going to have to be designing for vehicles that are brand new in 2025. Those won't be highly autonomous vehicles 2 years from now. There might be some in the fleet, but there's still going to be, by and large, a lot of limitations in the vehicle fleet. A lot of safety will come from vehicles, but we'll still have a lot of residual risk in the network. So physical separation on rural roads is critical with median barriers. So those median barriers prevent that head-on crash. Head-on crashes are our biggest killer in New Zealand. 70% of fatal injuries are on rural roads. half of our deaths are on state highways and half of those are due to head-on crashes. The head-on crashes is a significant problem, particularly in this region where you've got higher volumes, because the risk of head-on crash increases with volumes because there's a vehicle more likely to be coming in the other direction. And so physical separation is critical. Physical separation also allows us to keep our speed limits higher. Generally speaking, there might be some occasions where you've got really tight alignment and you need to look at a lower speed limit from a maintenance perspective, but generally speaking, and where you can't achieve that physical separation, we look to speed management for all those reasons highlighted before. Just a few slides to finish off with. So with regards to setting speed limits, the overriding principle or primary principle is around aligning speed limits that are safe and appropriate to this based on the safe system principle of what types of crashes we can withstand. So when we map the road network against its movement and place function, where we've got high numbers of active users, we would look at the 30 km/h speed limit and use that sort of approach. We're also looking at aligning with community wellbeing objectives. So creating a safer environment gets people out walking and cycling more, which has all those other benefits that we can expect. So ultimately, managing speed is about reducing emissions and air pollution as well. It's not just going to reduce trauma. It creates safer and healthier environments for us all, helps to increase cycling and walking, and ultimately will be a key contributor to our VK reduction targets as well. And that's a sort of a reinforcing circle there. The other point to make is that a small change in travel speed represents a relatively large change in stopping distance, a much larger change in impact speed, a still larger change in impact energy, and a very large change in the probability of death or serious injury. We all have a role to play, as I mentioned before. So you will be talking about your speed management plan, as I understand, after this, and that's the sort of thing that we as system designers and decision makers have an influence on how we create a safer system to help protect our road users. Just very quickly finishing off on some of the key interventions I mentioned, without going into the detail, happy to answer questions, but there is a lot of information around case studies to show how effective median barriers are, a lot of information about how they can be maintained and operated and how they are used and those sorts of things. The key thing for median barriers is that a median barrier on its own is our most effective intervention on a road network. It will reduce death and serious injuries by about 65% on average. We've seen places that are higher than that, but on average around 65%. So there's really good information on our website around that. And the other one is around raised safety platforms, which you'll be seeing more around the network. And I travelled over a raised pedestrian crossing on the way here from the airport, which was great to see. But this example here is actually a world-leading example of something done right here in your patch. You can see the crash stats leading up to the installation and a tragedy of a fatal injury just prior to its installation. Since then, we've had, as I understand, only one nose-to-tail fender bender on the side road, so it's been very effective. We would typically expect a well-designed roundabout to reduce death and serious injuries by about 85%, which is why it's considered a safe system treatment. By comparison, traffic signals do improve road safety, but we still have crashes happening when the lights are red, and it does nothing to slow people down. So when crashes occur, there might be fewer of them, they're still likely to end up being above those thresholds and people end up seriously injured. So you can actually make traffic signals safer and more closely aligned to the performance of a roundabout by putting in raised platforms like this. And these raised platforms are different to speed humps. They are purposefully designed for higher speed environments with softer approach ramps. Overseas research has shown that applying these can reduce death and serious injuries by about 40%. And as I said, that example you've got here in this region, Thomas Gordonton is a really good example of actually exceeding those sorts of those benefits. Raised safety platforms is a primary treatment. So we talk about in terms of primary and supporting treatment. Primary is really implementing something that goes really, really close to achieving protection against those injury thresholds that we mentioned earlier. So physical separation, slowing people right down, those sorts of things. Short of that, we can do other things that will help us move towards safe system, but we won't achieve the same outcomes. And by and large, you get at best about half the outcome. So in summary, last slide, for the road safety strategy, as I said, the 40% target is what we're striving to achieve. 40% target is based on a lot of robust evidence and modelling. We know what works. Our challenge is that we're not delivering at the necessary pace and scale. So that is our challenge before us. And I would, anyone that's interested, that document on the right is very, very useful reference in terms of what works and what does not work. Particularly when we're being asked to do things by the public. And what's quite interesting, and this document tackles it directly, is that there are a lot of interventions that people think make good common sense when in fact the evidence don't support them. In fact, the evidence a lot of times is either very weak, or the DSIs can actually, or the risk can actually go up by some of those. And a really good example of that is risk-based road user training, something that most people would promote as a good idea. You get people out there, particularly young drivers, and you teach them how to use their skid pan and all that sort of stuff, and how to react to high-risk situations. What the research shows is that on balance, the risk and the DSIs amongst people that have gone through that sort of training can actually go up. And generally that's about creating a more confident driver that's more likely to take risks. And that risk-taking actually offsets the knowledge that they've gained. So those sorts of things is why it's so important to ultimately look at the evidence when we're trying to make our network safer. Thank you for your time. Happy to take questions.
Cool. Thank you, Fabian. It's really quite an impactful presentation. Yeah, very timely. Thank you. Claire, you've got some questions?
Yes. It was about that amazing video, actually, that was pretty upsetting. Is that available publicly?
It is. I can just never find the link, but it is. It is something we use in all our collateral and so forth. So we have it. So I'm more than happy to make it available if you can't find it online. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be
So
great
if
if
there's
that could be
someone, maybe with
emailed
Dave
to
or
us.
someone I can.
Yeah, I'd really
I'll
appreciate
send it
that.
through.
Yeah, thank you. But awesome work, and looking forward to more regular updates. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, Adrian.
Yeah, that's really interesting, obviously being a speed demon that doesn't like travelling at 80 k's an hour on rural roads. I'll own that. Just cameras, they're currently only allowed on highways, is that correct? Speed cameras?
No, they are allowed on all roads. Auckland Transport in particular has a number of cameras on their network already. They've just rolled out another 10 or 9, I think. The work that we're doing and the safety camera program we're developing at a national level will include safety cameras on local.
Yeah,
Just don't have very many.
No, we don't. I guess the thing is from a town perspective, is the people that they think our roads, because we've got wide roads and trying to encourage people to cycle, but they don't realise that people don't feel safe because of the speeds they're travelling on the road. So if anything, it's probably more the town, some of the streets in the towns that actually need the cameras on them to get people to actually drive at the right speed. Interesting, the conversation around risk taking with, because driver education is still a factor, I guess, and being aware of when you're driving, being aware that there's a car there. Are they going to pull out or aren't they?
But driver education is still fundamentally important.
Yeah.
Research in Victoria in particular says that if we would, and we have a global leading graduated driver licensing scheme that others look to as a good practice. If we were to improve upon it, one of the key things that we could do that's been shown in Victoria is we could have, for instance, 120 hours supervised driving for our young and novice drivers as they're learning. That's probably the most effective thing. With regards to training, the research is probably, it's still not overwhelming, but if there's anything, it's probably more a defensive driver training course rather than risk-based driver training course. So the risk ones I've shown quite comprehensively to increase risk-taking, but a defensive driver course is likely to produce some sort of benefits, although overall the benefits aren't as much as doing things like supervised driving and making sure people go through that graduated driver licensing system.
I guess the thing is, a lot of us need to go through a driving school, presumably about a better driver than the previous. I guess is that statistic.
Whether they're going more to driving schools, I'm not sure. There is a whole range of tools available, like our Drive program that we work with ACC, and we have a lot of people going through that program, which is very successful. As I said, the graduated driver licensing system is quite comprehensive in terms of taking novice drivers through. The more we can do in terms of said supervised hours, it just helps people when they're making decisions, when they're new, and things like that. It's going to be more effective than training courses potentially, particularly if it's a risk-based.
Thank you. Jeanette.
Thank you for that presentation, and I've got two questions, sorry. The first one is about your list of 5 things. The first one you had there was about road policing, and obviously, regulation is great, but it needs enforcement. So is there sufficient funding and support from central government for that, particularly in the rural areas? Our district has 1,000 kilometres of roads.
In terms of road policing?
Yeah.
Yes, specifically. Yeah. So the overall indicative investment for roads over 10 years is around $10 billion through the GPS. 4.7 billion of that goes to road policing. So road policing is invested in very heavily. It's based on historic levels of investment. For the same levels of investment back in 2013, we were seeing significantly more road policing activity. So right at the moment, police, so not right now, say 12 months ago, road policing was probably achieving about 60 to 70% of their targets. That's now since just before Christmas started getting up around 80 to 90%. So we've seen a significant improvement in road policing activity. Our modelling shows that if police were to reach those targets, that would provide a good level of enforcement, particularly things like, for instance, there is research on how many breast screening tests we should be doing each year. And so 3 million is well within that range of best practice. 3 million is the target for police, but we're currently doing around 2.5, 2.6 million. So it shows that there's more improvement that can be taking place. I encourage you, and we are working at a national level to talk to your police counterparts to improve that performance. But we have seen a lot of improved performance in recent months since the last quarter of last year, calendar year.
Thank you. My second question relates to Tikawiti, where we have effectively a heavy traffic bypass with 2 crossings. One's had a serious injury, one's had a death. How do we get one of those raised platforms? What more do we need to do to get one?
To hear someone else actually want them.
Which type of crossing? I probably should clarify.
Pedestrian crossing.
Pedestrian crossing.
Yep, pedestrian crossing. Yeah, we
at grade raised platform type crossing.
Like the picture.
Like the picture, yeah. So
what Angela's got.
So yeah. So they are so those raised platforms are part of the standard safety intervention toolkit that Waka Kotahi provides. So and that type of treatment is very much encouraged and part of the speed infrastructure program. So from a national perspective, we would be very encouraging. If there's problems trying to get one in, then I could probably.
It's a state highway.
Oh, I couldn't comment on the specifics of it, but I can go back and have a chat.
Because I know that has been raised a few times. It was quite a large local issue after the first serious injury, and then not long after, there was a death on someone on a mobility scooter. So this is State Highway 3 going through Tikawiti. So if it could be raised up a bit, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
I'll have a chat with David.
Thank you. We'll go online. Councillor White.
Thank you. That was a really good presentation. I'd echo what the other people have said. I guess my question, and I know it's not your area, but I've done a lot of driving in the last 18 months over the State Highway network, as my kids have left home and I've got a bit more freedom. But I've been really quite surprised at the state of the network in terms of the potholes, or where the sub base hasn't been, replaced and it's become degraded. And so I've been very conscious that I have been driving, straddling those potholes and things by straddling close to the centre line, which puts me at really high risk because I was aware of the risk of head-ons. So to me, there's an underlying assumption that these 5 things which will decrease road deaths, which are good, are based on having a road surface that's good to drive on, and you're not having people wiggle all over the road, avoiding potholes and things. So, and we do get a lot of pushback from people around that about the state of the network. So I was wondering if you could comment on how, the basics are going to be addressed as well, or take that feedback to the team that can.
I think I'll answer it by using some of the wording that you put into your question. Yeah, the baseline modelling that sits below the 40% assumes that our network is maintained to the right levels of performance. So whilst I haven't included it as an improvement within that list, the underlying assumption is that our roads will be maintained to the appropriate levels.
Just to pick up a little bit more on that, what you will see where we are putting these barriers and things, for example, in is we are also at the same time upgrading and improving the road surface as part of that work. So it's taken us a while to align the implementation of the safety intervention and the maintenance and operations. But what you'll see now, and this is literally what's happening on State Highway 2 at the moment, is causing a fair bit of disruption. But by necessity, the surface is upgraded as those medium barriers are going in, so that we know that we've now got a long period of time with a good surface in it.
Sorry for a follow-up question, if that's okay. Is there any system in place, for example, on the road to Tauranga, there's a section in one of the small communities there, I think it's Tipoi from memory, but don't quote me on that, where there's a section where the surface is totally degraded, and so I drive by straddling the middle line and which makes me very nervous. Is there a system? I mean, I'm running on the assumption that this has been highlighted in some document somewhere and is scheduled for repair in some year. But, is there a system of feeding into that to say this is actually a really serious issue and I'm driving dangerously because of it? Can this go higher up on the priorities?
There's certainly if you provide that feedback, we provide that to the NOC manager, so our maintenance contract managers. And if there are areas, so our contract with them, I'm trying to think who it is over there. I don't think it's Higgins. It must be Hogan. The contract we have with them has some performance standards around maintenance, and it depends whether they're potholes or just scabbing on the road, for example. But they definitely have performance standards, and it's definitely something that we are interested in knowing. I drive that road a lot, and I know the spot you're talking about. So I'm pretty sure that is actually up in the priority list. But as I said before, the issues we've had with this winter has been accessibility, but also a lot of those teams have been off doing, we would call, emergency work to keep the road in place. So we're very much in catch-up mode, fortunately, in those areas.
Thank you.
Councillor Rodney.
I'm just a little bit concerned about the raised platforms. Never really thought about it driving a car because you don't notice it. But the other day I drove a load of cows, truck and trailer load of cows from Frankton Sale back to Mangatoot. So they've got to go on State Highway 3 where they've got the new Glenview bus thing. And even though it's signposted at 50k, I slowed down well under 30k, and it's still a massive lurch for a truck. And all the cows in the back are bloody scrambling around. It's pretty poor on animal welfare, I think. So I don't think they should be on state highways, to be fair. I understand a little urban areas. That was kind of one of the comment, but I guess we don't get asked as truckies what we think at times. But it is because trucks are designed to absorb the potholes, not take the whole motion up and over. So I don't know if anyone's even thought about that, but I didn't think about it. When I went over it and I thought, what's an idiot puts this in the bloody road? And probably most people don't think about it.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
The sort of the vertical acceleration on occupants, I'm not so much sure about animals, has certainly been tested. So the profile, as I mentioned, the profile is completely different to a speed hump, or at least it should be. I probably couldn't comment on that specific example. It could be that the profile isn't quite in alignment. We have seen that before. So whether it's a profile thing in terms of how it's been applied, or whether it's a profile with regards to the standard that we're using. But the standard itself has been quite comprehensively tested with the likes of buses, trucks, those sorts of things. But happy to have a conversation and learn out more about that specific example. If there's anything we can learn from that one.
Yeah, another little question I had was on the speed limits. For instance, we're on a consultation at the moment. They want to put the bypasses at 80k limit at the moment. The average speed that people are driving over is 55, but we want to allow it to 60. If you change it to 60, do people sort of go another 20k under? Like, is there any statistics on that? Like at the moment it's 80 and people are only driving at 55 on average.
Yeah.
So if you allow it to 60, are people going to drive at 30, or is there any document on that?
There is comprehensive research internationally I'll talk about what we're seeing locally in a moment, but internationally, the research is aggregated on the basis that if you reduce the speed limit by 10 kilometres, for every 10 kilometres an hour you reduce the speed limit, you'll get about a 3 to 4 kilometre an hour reduction in mean speed. So if your speed limit is currently 100 kilometres an hour and people are doing 96 kilometres an hour, and you drop that down to 80 kilometres an hour, you would expect people to do 8 kilometres an hour less, was about 88 kilometres an hour. So what we're seeing is, as an example on the Safe Highway 6 Benham to Nelson, is where we lowered the speed limit from 100 to 90. We saw that 3 to 4 k an hour reduction. We actually got a bit better than that. We got about 5 or 6. Where we went from 100 down to 60 in some cases, where it was over a range and things like that, where people are already doing 50, 60 kilometres an hour, it had a lesser impact. But people were still travelling below the speed limit. One of the key things also from us, from a road safety perspective, is there's a key difference between compliance and safety. So with those statistics I just mentioned, we know, and we've seen on a couple of examples, you might get a 30% reduction in death and serious injury by lowering the speed limit from 100 to 80, even though some people are still speeding. So there's a difference between safety and compliance, and they require two different things.
Thank you.
Councillor Phillip.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I won't hold you up too much longer. Thanks, Fabian. That was a really sobering presentation. And just a bit of my background, I was brought up, my dad was panel beater with tow trucks, and he used to make a point of taking us out to a lot of the accidents on and around the Coromandel. And the Tapu Hill old days was one of the main ones, Len will know. So I saw a lot of the carnage on the roads. And I'm really quite passionate about it as well. And I didn't want you to take my comments lightly with regard to the speed limit on that basis. But a lot of it comes down to changing people's behaviours. You're well aware of that. So the decisions that we make on the speed management plan, that people take a long time to change those behaviours. So all I'm talking about is compromising this. We don't want to focus solely on the modelling. We want to bring some level of common sense into it, and it needs to be able to compromise with where we drop these speed limits. I find, like Rodney was saying, most people, wherever you go now, you're basically driving 80 k's on the main roads because there's a lot of older people and a lot less confident roads. So, but that does create some impatience. But yeah, I was really impressed with the presentation and hope we get a good result out of this management.
Thank you. Just very quick response. I appreciate those comments. And I think the speed management guide is unapologetically trying to set a end state so that people can see what we're working towards. So it does set speed limits in accordance with the physical separation versus speed management approach based on those injury tolerance limits. So it does say if you don't have a median barrier, the speed limit shouldn't be above 80 k an hour. But it does provide flexibility in terms of how fast you move towards that. So we could use, for example, and the guide does allow use of 90 kilometres an hour as an interim option for a period of time while we generate that greater public support. But I guess sort of being a two-way thing, one of my key things that I'm most conscious about is at a national level, you're absolutely right, we've got a lot to do to bring the New Zealand community with us around this. And you've probably seen some of the storytelling from today that I don't see out there in terms of the conversation we're having with communities. If there's ways that you think we could improve how we engage with communities around some of this storytelling and how we talk about speed and some of these interventions, I'd be more than happy to hear your insights and thoughts. Thank you, everyone, again for today.
Cool. Thank you, Fabian, for your time and the presentation as well. Look forward to you sending that video through. Help with our storytelling, I think, within our communities. All right, we've got a mover. Do we have a seconder? Thanks, Rodney. All those in favour? Against? Carried. All right, there's just two things left to do before we, or one thing before we get to the karakia, and that is to acknowledge Mark. It is Mark's last meeting with us before he leaves. And yeah, I just wanted to say that we will really miss you when you stepped into the role of Director of Regional Connections for Transport. yeah, it was much needed, and your expertise in integrated land use planning and transport has really taken us where we need to get in a short period of time. So thank you for everything that you've done, and you will be missed. Yeah. But LJ says in the interim, if anyone's got any questions or emails while we're getting Mark's replacement sorted, email her and she will redirect you where you need to go. Did you want to?
Thank you very much for those kind words. I've been supporting the Regional Transport Committee since I first started in my previous role 5 years ago. So I've had the benefit of working with a great team, both in terms of the staff who have supported me in our work. Also really enjoy the Regional Transport Committee. I keep coming back to the fact that it is a really unique committee with a really unique voice, in that it brings together on a really equal footing each one of the territorial authorities. It has a very distinct mandate in the way that it communicates publicly and with government, and I've really enjoyed that and the constructive approach that all of its members have taken, including the respectful way that they've been that they've dealt with my staff and I. So thank you all very much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Angela. Yeah, we'll have the chance to work together for still a little while. I'm off from the end of July. Until then, feel free to stay in touch with me. And as has been offered, LJ will direct traffic from there on and until somebody else is in my seat. Thank you.
Right, we'll end with the karakia. Unahia, unahia, unahia mai te uru tapu nui. Te wātea kia mama. Te nākau, te tina, na, te hina naro, e te ara takatū. Wea rā e rongo e whakakai ria. Aki kia ronga, kia tina, tina, humie, huie, tai kia. All right, thank you everyone. Lunch is through the next room.